Our next presentation is from the home team. We welcome Jaroslaw Meyer-Szary. That was a hopeless pronunciation, and the Poles are all laughing at me now. This is no disrespect to Poland, I may say. Just pronounce your own name.
It's Jaroslaw Meyer-Szary.
It's exactly what I said. Exactly what I said.
So I'm perfectly familiar with...
Let me introduce you. Hang on. This lovely boy here. Assistant Professor, Department of Pediatric Cardiology and Congenital Heart Diseases at the Medical University of Gdansk, and you've used decentralized trials in pediatric cardiology. So tell us about your experiences.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor for me to be here, and a really great distinction that came out of nowhere, I would say. I didn't expect it. Anyways, I'm a physician part-time and scientist part-time, so I have an insight from kind of both sides to the topic, and I would like to share the experience from one particular study that is still ongoing. It's a study. The presentation will be kind of like in three parts delivered. One is the intro, then I'll pitch a little bit about the project, the study, and then I'll talk about the decentralized elements that we have implemented and the lessons learned from it. So children are a special, unique population that has different developmental and physiological needs than adults. And this poses special approach to clinical trials as well. And rare diseases are another source of kind of like several problems in conducting clinical trials, and it happens so that the clinical trial that I'm a part of is actually dealing with both children and chronic rare disease, which is Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And this is because, I mean, this is no surprise, because more than half of rare diseases start to present in the childhood, because most of them are genetically programmed or determined. Anyways, there are several distinct challenges to rare diseases trials, and I will focus mostly on the left panel, the population-derived challenges. There is a limited patient population, no surprise. Geographic dispersion, this was already mentioned today, heterogeneity of the patient population, great variability of prior treatments, participation in other trials and experiments, and we have experienced this particular thing very clearly with our population as well. And this is because there is no uniform approach to these diseases. There are no guidelines many times. Duchenne muscular dystrophy has actually guidelines, but the adherence to those is still not 100%, so we see this variability. And difficulties in recruiting and retaining those patients derived from all the above. There are other limitations, but I'm not going to discuss it today. And getting ready for the talk today, I came across a very interesting study. I'll focus on one piece of data that was presented on this, in this publication. The limitations related to patient and parent, because there are also parents when we talk about children involved, logistics in participating in clinical trials. Parents have their work schedules, children have their school schedules, they have difficulties in transportation. Many of our patients are wheelchair bound, and some of them are obese, and they need not only a wheelchair but also a crane, kind of like a small patient crane to move around. And this definitely limits their ability to come to our center. Insufficient compensation for time and transportation costs. We include some degree of compensation, but this, we are aware of it, does not fully compensate for their losses. And childcare concerns. They have siblings, they have other family members maybe to take care of, like elderly. And This will be especially important when the visit is lengthy. Our visits are 2 days long, I will talk about it later, and how frequent they are. So as you can see, all these things I've mentioned are actually on the problem side. As you can see, the blue boxes. This is all identified as possible problems and limitations to participation. So this is where DCT comes in and the promises it brings. The goals, as mentioned by European Medicine Agency, increased participation, improved retention, enhanced data collection. I will not discuss the details, but this is what the DCT are aiming at. The benefits: better generalizability, reduced costs, improved patient experience, and quicker data acquisition and analysis. This might be important in the next pandemic situation, for instance. But time is always of an essence in case of any kind of a disease. And there are also threats that were identified. Many more were identified, and they were thoroughly discussed today. The few I wanted to mention is robustness, security, privacy measures, digital access to technology. So, yeah, it's a big topic. Treatment at home, as decentralized trials are also called, as far as I understand, in part comes from the idea of hospital at home. And Rachel mentioned three alternative names for it, but ChatGPT mentions many more. And I hope this is all hallucination, because we're not going to manage if we have 7 names for the same. Okay, so definitely we need to standardize the naming. Speaking of hospital at home, I was interested in where this, how long this idea has been around, and I did a PubMed search, and what I found is this publication from 1894. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know why it doesn't show up. Anyways, 1894. It's long way that this idea has been around, and I really was surprised with detailed recommendations of what we should provide for the patient to ease his disease and improve his comfort for the patient to become healthy and strong again. The first time I fully realized how capable hospital at home idea can be is when I was doing my specialization course for a pediatric cardiologist. And one of the publications I've came around has shown that in case of those most severe cases of congenital heart diseases, there is very high mortality that can be managed successfully by very simple measures done at home. What they did is they instructed the parents in the intervention arm to do blood oxygen saturation at home and weighing the baby, because the baby is supposed to grow at a certain pace. Very simple stuff. And note down, and they were certain threshold, and those patients that were falling behind were scheduled earlier visits at the hospital, at site, earlier than the ones that would be following the normal routine with pre-planned visit dates. And what they managed to achieve by these simple measures is reducing mortality in this group from 16% to 0. This was astonishing revelation to me that we can actually improve the outcome of patients by doing very simple stuff at home. And the next step that led me to speaking to you today is being part of a Rare Diseases Center in my hospital in Gdańsk. It's the second such center in Poland, and it's focused on treating patients with rare diseases, as you can imagine. there is a group of experts and specialists taking care of several different kinds of congenital heart disease, including Duchenne muscular dystrophy, as one of the most common rare diseases, in fact. And we were running a project aiming to develop a system for IT system to improve integrated care and care plans for this special group of patients. And one of the exploratory aims of the project, this was not the main part of the project, but we were exploring other possibilities, was hospital at home capacity of such a system. This is the team. There were many stakeholders involved, the university, the hospital, the parent project, muscular dystrophy, it's a parent advocacy group, patient advocacy group involving parents, the IT and founding agencies. And, all this experience together has led me to become part of the randomized clinical trial that I'm going to shortly speak about. It's a trial about the efficacy and safety of metoprolol as an add-on treatment to ACE inhibitors in preventing cardiomyopathy in patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, children more than 8 years of age, and it's a randomized clinical trial. It is being led by head of my department, Professor Joanna Kwiatkowska, and it's being founded by a research agency, a medical research agency. It's a Polish founding agency, and led by Medical University of Gdańsk. So the Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a rare disease, like I mentioned. It's one of the most common ones. It's a race with time. Those patients do not live long. They started to have symptoms at about 5 years of age, and if left totally untreated, most of them die before the age of 20. Nowadays, the life expectancy is far better thanks to improved care, including at home, because the main way that we improve their survival is ventilatory or respiratory support at home. They now manage to live up to their 25 years of age on the mean. And this has led to a change in the reasons or the causes of death among those patients, from respiratory failure to cardiac failure to heart failure due to cardiomyopathy that develops along with weakness of the breathing muscles and ambulatory muscles. So the newest populations live longer, but still, like I said, they mostly die of cardiac causes. So this is where cardiologists come in handy. This is data from our center prior to starting the clinical trial, our prior experience, and we clearly see that they start to become diseased early on, as early as 5-7 years of age, and this is where the idea of prophylaxis comes in. One of the founding publications in this manner comes from France, from Dr. Duboc, where he has shown in a relatively small clinical trial that early introduction of ACE inhibitors, way before they actually develop heart failure, is actually saving their hearts and lives. And they've proven that this actually diminishes mortality. So this was later on shown in a big registry to be generalizable to a bigger population in a less restrictive setting, because we know all that clinical trials have very restrictive setting, and then those results not always generalized to general population. But this has shown that this idea is valid. So the question comes, if we can add another drug of a different group, usually used for heart failure treatment, but earlier than that, can we boost the prophylactic effect? And spironolactone, eplerenone, and beta blockers were considered, but for many clinical reasons that I'm not going to discuss today, as they're not in the focus, beta blockers were most interesting for us, and this is how we arrived to IMP of the study. They are not mentioned in the guidelines, moreover, because there is not enough evidence, and they have very there is little literature on prophylactic use of beta blockers in this patient group. 2 randomized trials have unfortunately failed in this manner. They both used combined treatment, ACE plus beta blockers against placebo, and they didn't achieve the required number of patients to succeed. We had the strong impression that there is something about it, but we all don't know what exactly to do. I mean, if we should use these drugs or not, because we don't have enough evidence. So this is where this is the rationale for the study that I was trying to explain, I hope clearly now. So the big beta blockers as prevention on top of ACE inhibitors that we now consider a standard of care. PICO, boys with Duchenne confirmed, at least 8 years of age, metoprolol as an intervention, placebo as comparison, decreasing rate of heart failure as the primary outcome, so it's an echocardiographic derived outcome. This is why a fully decentralized trial in this setting wouldn't be possible, but we have included some elements I'm going to discuss now. And it's randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled standard approach to this matter. Variance in the patient population treatment is shown in this table. Those patients were taking all different kinds of ACE inhibitors when they were at the moment of being recruited. We knew about it prior to writing up the protocol. What we have decided to do is to adjust the dose and not to switch the drugs to make it kind of like easier for the patients. There were several exclusion criteria, mostly taking beta blockers for other reasons prior to enrollment. And like I mentioned, it's about complementary treatment. So both arms were taking standard of care ACE inhibitors, like I mentioned. Several endpoints considered as secondary to know more about the disease and its progression and the effect of the IMP on that, and the flow chart, and the registration process starts with the electronic kind of like questionnaire. I will talk about it later. And then we had this flow of patients being screened and recruited, and then the up-titration phase and the maintenance phase where the dose is stable or it's adjusted when the patient grows bigger. The visit plan, quite a lot of visits actually, and quite busy schedule of activities or schedule of assessments during the visits. But still, we put an important point on the home monitoring plan, mostly for safety monitoring, where blood pressure and peak flow metry was assessed, along with signs and symptoms possibly related to adverse events of the IMP. And dosing is a little bit tricky because those are children coming in all sizes, and we need to up-titrate with a very gradual approach through 5 levels or steps. So this is how it looked like. It's fascinating, but I'm not going to discuss it for today. It's not the topic. And this is the breakdown or infographic, kind of like splash screen of the whole study. Now, I will switch to talking about the decentralized elements, which I think are most interesting for all the audience today. The recruitment, remote consent, patient-reported outcomes, and drug delivery. We have experienced all of those elements in some way, and I'm sharing these insights. So along with electronic clinical record files, we had to develop something that we call ECRF for the patients, which is basically kind of a twin platform. I mean, this is one platform, okay? One system, it's intertwined, it works together. Only that for reasons related to data security, the patient doesn't have the access to what the doctors see, and this is how the security and accessibility is managed. The recruitment. We are the only site in Poland. We decided that it is going to be more feasible in this way. Poland isn't a big country anyway, anyways, and it's well communicated. This was our assumption early on, and it would be easier to start with one site in one country like ours, especially that there are not so many patients. And so then we had to approach how to inform and get interested and recruit those patients. So the biggest cohort came from our hospital that was already taking care of altogether 100 patients with DMD, which is the biggest cohort in active care in Poland. So most of our patients came from this cohort. And then we reached out to fellow doctors, both neurologists and cardiologists, that we reached out with the information that we're studying the trial. We reached out to patient advocacy groups, and we went online with social media, web pages, including patient advocacy web pages, and press, and all other ways that we could communicate, including kind of like information during the conferences that we did for the doctors and also for the patients. And the patient interested is supposed to fill up one questionnaire regarding the Guardian data, mostly communication data, like the phone number, email address, and so on, so on. So they basically register to our system. They get an email. They confirm that the data is valid, and then they fill up a questionnaire. It's more medical questionnaire regarding their children, so they also consent for that because there are medical data. Very scarce, very little, mostly about the inclusion and exclusion criteria, no more, because we still do not have kind of like full consent for gathering information on the patient, so we went down to bare minimum on that matter. This information is sent to our cloud system and filtered, analyzed, and candidates are being selected. This is our website information sheet that was printed and posted. The parent project organization, some other organizations, media, a conference for the parent and patients being held annually. This is part of our collaboration with the advocacy groups. Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy Day, which is celebrated every 7th of September. Web page for the professionals, and this is the questionnaires that are sent, that are posted online for the parent and the candidate, the patient in question, okay? So after having, we had 70 questionnaires filled up so far. 3 were duplicated, not so many, some were incomplete. After a phone call, we are able to kind of like encourage the patients to complete the data. Not all have noticed that the process is 2-step. So we were able to fix that after a phone call. There were 42 patients eligible, and please notice we have already, during this pre-screening process, eliminated about 20 patients that would otherwise have to come into our site, making a long travel, and would very early on be found to be ineligible because they were not the proper age or taking beta blockers already before, or being in another clinical trial, or other reasons, okay? So this electronic screening, recruitment and screening process has already helped, and before we even started. And at the moment we have 36 patients screened and enrolled. They come from all over Poland, but interesting finding is that both on East and West there are blind dots, kind of like areas where no patients are coming. That's an interesting finding. I can't explain it. It might be due to highways availability or maybe some other reasons. Hard to say, because we have no access to those patients, so we can't even ask them question, why don't you want to participate? Anyways, remote consent. Most of the time we are aiming at speaking with both of the parents, because this is required by our hospital and by Polish law, okay? And this is the standard, this is the default option. But of course, there are situations when one of the parents is not able to come. And this might be a deal breaker for some of the families, because they are work schedules, for instance, that I have mentioned, or maybe they are midways in the process of divorcing or already divorced or whatsoever. The father is not, this is one kind of like specific example. The father is not willing to come. He's willing to talk and give the concern, but not willing to come. So this is where we, as a backup option, have introduced e-consent, okay? And how we go about it is that we're sending out by post normal paperwork. We're calling the father, or the other parent actually, okay? And discussing the protocol, all the details required for informed consent, and only after that the parent is signing the papers and sending them back to the site. We're discussing the possibility of using electronic signature. It is possible, technically and legally available in Poland, but it would be for practical reasons a little bit too difficult to introduce for singular cases, okay? So we gave up on this process and we hold on to the papers for now, but we have explored legal possibilities and this is available. So yeah, the papers come back and then we can consider that they are legally binding. Patient-reported outcomes. This is the most interesting part for me, because I'm also a little bit enthusiastic about statistics and data analysis and visualization. So patient-reported outcomes. First thing I'm going to discuss is the blood pressure measurements. It's simple, right? Everybody can do it. And so there are several methods. The one that is most interesting for us is home blood pressure measurements. Office, this is the most popular. When you come to the office, the doctor measures the blood pressure, maybe the nurse. And then ambulatory, also known as Holter blood pressure, 24-hour blood pressure monitoring, which is the golden standard. It's most cumbersome because you need to carry the device 24 hours. It has to be analyzed, but it's most precise, and it's golden standard, okay? So everything is compared against this golden standard. So home blood pressure monitoring, a single measurements, not the 24-hour one, is being explored since the 90s. At first, it was mentioned that it has limited value in general practice, but actually if you read into the publication, it says that it has no advantage over the clinic or office blood pressure, which means that it's neither better nor worse. It just has the same disadvantages as compared to the golden standard. Then self-monitoring, how many measurements do we need? Such a simple thing to sort out. And then is fully automated better than the traditional one with the stethoscope. And then in regards of the reproducibility, and then what are the normal values, because this is a different way of measuring and there are different conditions at home, so there must be different normal values before we can say that based on this method the patient is hypertensive, hypotensive or whatsoever. So development of normal values is a task of itself when using a novel or a different method. And then which one is preferred, comparing those two methods. So those are valid questions to be answered. And And then we go on to special populations like children. It differs, and we need to investigate that before we can say that it is useful, valid, and reproducible, and so on and so on. Those are all important things that we need to consider in clinical trials. So we have to start over the same process with children. Again, how many measurements, what are the normal values, what devices should we use? There are also other new challenges like the size of the cloth that we need to use, and so on, so on. So trying to write up the protocol, the part of the protocol in that manner turned out to be a nightmare. Yeah. So eventually I turned to kind of like a guru in the field, because there are web pages to help you choose a validated device, but at the time when we were writing out the protocol, there was one device being validated for home blood pressure monitoring in children, and it was not available on the market anymore because it was already so long. Nowadays, there are 3. That is better. And so I had this conversation, email conversation with one of the lead scientists in this topic, and he admitted that the situation in validation in children is disappointing. The worst problem is below age 12, and that they're working hard. I mean, the research groups to sort that out. One caveat, the wrist blood pressure monitors, the smart devices, they have terrible validation outcomes. And as far as I'm very enthusiastic about the new devices, the wearables, and all the technological breakthroughs, we need to be aware that before they actually become valid, reproducible, comparable to our golden standards, it's a long way. And using them in clinical trials poses threats of arriving at invalid data in the end. So just to remember. Also, we need to teach the parent the procedure and then keep track on the data. The parents are expected to fill up a questionnaire twice a week, including symptoms and measurements. And the server managing data is sending out an invitation twice a week on weekday 1 and on weekend 1. An invitation with a link, kind of a reminder. And if the parent does not respond in 24 hours, there is another reminder coming in. And if the patient does not respond, we have lack of data in the data sheet. Anyways, most of the time they respond, they make the measurements, and they return their values to the cloud service of the ECRF. So this is very simple message, just to remind. This is the one example of patient. The data is quite reproducible. The dots on the bottom, as you can see on the 0 line, are missing data. And the compliance is quite good. Most of the patients have near 100% compliance, and more than 3/3 have more than 3/3 of data complete. So, yeah. This is the breakdown, day by day for each patient. As you can see, most of the data is green, which is the data is present. But we can see several patterns of non-compliance. This is very interesting. There are patients that are compliant but non-systematic. We have singular dropouts in the data, completeness. Early non-compliant patients that from the very beginning, almost from the very beginning, they do not follow the protocol and they don't care. And late non-compliant patients, they started very eager, but then apparently they got tired or bored or whatsoever. We remind them how important it is for us to collect the data and how important it is for them to have this data collected, because if there is anything going on, we can refer to whether it's because of the drug, because of there is hypotension, for instance, or something else. So we have identified possible reasons for non-compliance as lack of access to the computer or internet, temporary, change of email address so they don't get a reminder, lack of time or will, the blood pressure is not working, for instance, the batteries are down, and other reasons. The drug delivery process, this was used in our trial in kind of an emergency situation. In Poland, it's quite restrictive. The law is quite restrictive. The only way we can go about it is to use specialized delivery system directly to the guardian. We cannot go to the GP office with the drug. We cannot go to the nearest pharmacy with the drug. So it's costly, and it wouldn't be feasible for, in our setting, to use it broadly, for the reasons of cost and legal issues. So sometimes a singular car has to go through the whole country to deliver the drug, and this is why. So just to summarize, including elements of decentralized trials into pediatric and rare diseases trials is feasible, applicable, and helpful, but it has many limitations, including legal, technical, practical, and others. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Terrific. And the word you were searching for is not a small crane, it's a hoist.
Excuse me?
A hoist is what you call a crane
All right.
for a patient.
The patients, they have their own most of the time if they need to. Otherwise, they're totally bed-bound and they cannot kind of go out anywhere, including GP office in that manner. So those parents that are kind of like more resourceful, they organize in one way or the other through fundraising or some other help such a crane. In our hospital we have one for the patients, but still if they want to get to the car, they need to have their own.
Yeah.
So it's a limitation in this disease.
Thank you. Any questions in the audience? Christine, how about online? Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.